Louisiana, 1811. Flames rose from the sugar plantations of the German coast. At the front of hundreds marching for freedom was Charles Deslondes, turning machetes and torches into weapons, and despair into the largest uprising against slavery in American history. The German coast stretched along the Mississippi River, just upriver from New Orleans, a region that seemed to embody both wealth and horror. The fertile soil made it one of the richest sugar-producing areas in Louisiana, and the fortunes of the planters swelled with each harvest. But behind the polished mansions and rows of cane lay a brutal truth. Sugar was called white gold for a reason. It devoured the lives of the men and women forced to cultivate it. From sunrise until long after dusk, African Americans toiled in the fields, their backs bent, their hands cut raw by cane stalks sharp as blades. The labor was relentless, the overseers merciless. The crack of the whip was as constant as the drone of insects in the swamps. For the owners, the plantation was paradise. For the people in chains, it was hell disguised as farmland. German coast plantations ran on discipline, enforced with blood. Work crews were driven into exhaustion. Pregnant women were forced to labor. Children were denied innocence, pushed into the fields as soon as they could walk steadily. And death was not a release, but a reminder. Bodies were often buried without ceremony, the graves marked by nothing but the memories of those left behind. Yet beneath the surface of this suffocating system, a storm was quietly gathering. Among the hundreds laboring was a man named Charles Deslondes. To the planters, he was just another pair of hands. To his own people, he carried the unspoken weight of a dream. He had seen enough of misery to know that submission meant only slow death. Something inside him resisted. The German coast seemed unshakable, ruled by whips and guns, but history often begins with whispers. In the quiet moments, in the shadows of cane huts, the seeds of rebellion were being sown. Charles Deslondes listened, watched, and waited. The land of the whip would one day taste fire. Charles Deslondes was born into bondage, his life marked from the beginning by the will of others. Yet unlike many trapped in the fields, Deslondes was forced into a different role, that of an overseer on the Andre plantation. It was a cruel irony, a man in chains set to watch over others in chains. He carried no freedom, but his position gave him proximity to the world of the masters. This uneasy role granted him something precious: information. As overseer, Deslondes heard whispers not meant for enslaved ears. He saw where weapons were kept, how the household operated, and which nights the planter's guard grew lax. He became a bridge between two worlds, despised by some of his fellow laborers for his position, but secretly respected for what he carried in silence. To many, the overseer's post was a poisoned gift, turning the oppressed into an enforcer. But Deslondes was different. He bore the humiliation outwardly, yet inwardly he stored each detail, each weakness, like coals waiting to ignite. The more he witnessed, the more he understood. This system thrived only because its victims submitted, and he knew submission could not be his path. Life offered him no illusions. He had seen men whipped until their backs turned to pulp, women broken under the weight of endless harvests, families shattered as children were sold downstream. He had seen death come quietly in the night, unnoticed, unremembered, as if those lives had never mattered. And he realized that unless something changed, his own fate would be the same, to die silently, nameless in the soil of a cane field. Charles Deslondes refused that fate. Though the chains remained, his spirit did not bow. In the shadows of his overseer's role, he began to weave connections with others who felt the same burning need. Quiet conversations, fleeting glances, coded signals passed in the dark, all became threads of a larger plan. He knew the risk, knew the price could be his life, but in his heart, he held a single, immovable truth: better to die striking for freedom than to live forever in silence. Rebellions are never born in the open. They take root in silence, nurtured by hunger and fury, whispered in places where masters cannot hear. For Charles Deslondes, the Andre plantation became both prison and crucible. Every glance across the cane fields, every lash of the whip, deepened his resolve. He was no longer just imagining freedom, he was plotting it. Deslondes gathered trusted men in secret, never too many at once, never in places that would draw suspicion. A word here, a gesture there. Plans hidden in the rhythm of work, in the quiet moments after dusk, when the cane huts were lit only by flickering fire. Slowly, A network grew, men and women who understood that survival without liberty was a hollow victory. The plan was ambitious, even audacious. They would strike at the heart of the system. First, seize weapons from the Andre estate. Then, spread like fire across the German coast, gathering hundreds to their cause. Each plantation passed would be another spark, another set of hands gripping machetes, axes, or torches. Their ultimate goal was New Orleans, the jewel of Louisiana, where they dreamed of declaring freedom in the face of the world. It was not a dream of chaos. Deslondes and his co-conspirators wanted more than revenge. They wanted to burn the cane, yes, but also to build something new upon the ashes, a space where men and women of African descent could live without chains, where children would not be born already condemned. The risks were enormous. Every plantation was a fortress of its own, backed by armed militia and the authority of the state. Betrayal was a constant danger. One careless word could mean slaughter before the first strike was ever launched. Still, the conspirators pressed forward because the alternative, quiet death in the cane fields, was no alternative at all. By late 1810, the whispers had solidified into a plan. The fire was ready. It only needed the spark. The evening of the 8th of January, 1811, was heavy with silence. On the Andre plantation, routine cloaked the air. Overseers settled into their duties, the planter's family returned to their house, and the enslaved retired to their quarters. But beneath that fragile order, the storm was waiting. Charles Deslondes gave the signal, and everything changed. The first blow fell within the master's home. The Andre family was attacked, weapons seized, fear spreading faster than flame. A shot rang out, then another, and suddenly the night was alive with violence. For the first time, the masters tasted the terror they had inflicted for generations. Torches were lit, and the great house went up in flames. Fire licked the sky, a red banner visible for miles along the Mississippi. It was not just destruction, it was a declaration. The German coast had been silent too long, and now it roared. Men and women poured from the quarters, machetes in hand, axes raised, sticks sharpened into spears. Drums beat, voices cried out, "Liberty!" The uprising surged forward like a river that had broken its banks. The sugar fields that had swallowed so many lives now gave birth to an army. The planters who survived fled into the darkness, their world overturned. For once, they were the hunted, and their grand homes became pyres marking the rebellion's path. As the flames spread, so too did the call. Join us, fight with us, march for freedom. The night of uprising was both triumph and warning. Triumph, because for those few hours the enslaved held their destiny in their own hands. Warning, because dawn would bring the wrath of an empire determined to crush them. Still, as the sky glowed red, Charles Deslondes knew history had shifted. Silence was broken. The march for freedom had begun. By the time dawn broke on January 9, the German coast was no longer silent. What began as a spark at the Andre plantation had swelled into a force hundreds strong. Men and women poured into the ranks, some carrying machetes sharpened for the harvest, others wielding axes, clubs, or crude farm tools. A few clutched muskets and shotguns seized from terrified planters. It was not a professional army, it was something more primal, more desperate, an army of the oppressed. They marched along the Mississippi levee in formation, as if mimicking the drills of soldiers they had watched from afar. At the front, drums pounded a rhythm, steady and unyielding, the sound carrying across the cane fields. Songs of freedom rose into the morning air, mingling with the smoke of burning plantations left behind. Each step forward was both victory and defiance. Along the road, more men and women joined them, abandoning fields that had consumed their youth. Their cries of "Liberty" echoed like thunder rolling down the river. The rebellion was no secret. It announced itself boldly, daring the world to see. The path behind them was scarred by fire. Mansions were reduced to glowing skeletons, cane fields burned black, and the wealth of the German coast went up in smoke. For once, the masters knew the terror of fleeing with nothing but the clothes on their backs. As the force swelled to nearly 500, their destination loomed in every mind: New Orleans. The city represented both power and possibility. If they reached it, if they could capture its heart, perhaps freedom would no longer be a dream whispered in darkness, but a reality proclaimed in daylight. The march was not only physical, it was symbolic. Each mile marked a break from centuries of silence. For those few days, they were not merely enslaved laborers, they were soldiers of their own destiny. They were free in spirit, and for the first time, the land trembled before them. News of the uprising spread like wildfire, carried by frightened planters galloping downriver toward New Orleans. Each report grew more alarming. Hundreds on the march, plantations burning, masters killed or driven into flight. By the time the first riders reached the city, panic had already taken hold. New Orleans was a city on edge. Its prosperity depended on the very plantations now in flames. Merchants, officials, and slaveholders saw not just rebellion, but the possible unraveling of the entire order. The memory of the Haitian Revolution still haunted them, tales of an enslaved people defeating European armies, founding a republic of their own. Could that nightmare repeat itself here, in Louisiana? Authorities acted with ruthless urgency. Governor William Claiborne called out the militia. General Wade Hampton and other military leaders mobilized regular U.S. troops. Cavalry patrols rode upriver, armed with rifles and sabers. Planters formed local posses, fueled by fear and rage, eager to defend their wealth. The uprising had struck at their very existence, and they would stop at nothing to crush it. Meanwhile, rumors spread faster than truth. Some whispered that thousands were rising, that the entire African-American population of Louisiana was ready to throw off its chains. Others claimed the rebels were headed straight for the city gates. Shops closed, citizens armed themselves, and the streets buzzed with dread. The image of hundreds marching in formation, drums echoing, torches burning, haunted the imaginations of those who had always believed themselves safe. The balance of power, so carefully maintained, had cracked. But the rebels carried more courage than weapons, and courage alone could not stop bullets. The authorities knew this, and they were determined to turn panic into swift and merciless action. The clash between freedom's marchers and the forces of the state was inevitable. Blood would decide whose vision would survive. For 2 days, the march surged forward, but freedom's army was made of cane knives and farm tools, while the enemy gathered rifles, sabers, and horses. The imbalance was clear, yet the rebels pressed on, their spirit unbroken even as the odds darkened. Near the swamps and fields along the Mississippi, the inevitable confrontation came. Militias and U.S. troops closed in, their cavalry sweeping the levees, their muskets aimed with cold precision. The rebels, exhausted but resolute, stood their ground. Drums beat one final time, echoing through the cane fields like a heartbeat before silence. The first volleys of gunfire tore through the air, shattering the fragile hope of victory. Men fell, their bodies crumpling into the earth they had worked and bled on. Still, others charged forward, swinging machetes and axes, clashing against steel and shot. The courage was boundless, but the weapons were no match. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. Smoke clouded the air, screams mingled with the sharp reports of rifles, and the once-ordered march unraveled into scattered resistance. Some fled into the swamps, hoping to hide among the reeds and mud. Others fought to the last breath, determined to fall as warriors rather than as slaves. By the battle's end, dozens of rebels lay dead. Blood seeped into the soil of the German coast, mingling with the ashes of burned plantations. The survivors who were captured faced no mercy. For the authorities, this was not only a fight to restore order, it was a chance to send a message carved in terror. The unequal battle proved what Deslondes and his followers had always known. Freedom would not be granted, it would have to be seized at unbearable cost. And though they had been defeated in arms, the rebellion had already written itself into the memory of the land. Charles Deslondes was among those taken alive. For the planters and authorities, his capture was not enough. They wanted more than his death. They wanted a spectacle, a punishment so cruel that no one would dare dream of freedom again. He was dragged before his captors, not as a soldier who had led an army, but as property defying its masters. Yet in their eyes was fear, the kind that comes when power feels itself tremble. To erase that fear, they chose brutality. Deslondes was mutilated piece by piece. His hands, the same that had held a torch of rebellion, were cut away. His legs, that had marched at the head of hundreds, were hacked off. He was burned alive, his body reduced to smoke and ash. It was not justice, nor law. It was vengeance. Witnesses remembered the cruelty, not because it silenced the dream of liberty, but because it revealed how terrified the masters truly were. By destroying him so savagely, they admitted what they could never say aloud, that Deslondes had shown them their world could be shaken. To those who saw him die, the image was unforgettable. a man chained in life, unbowed in spirit, paying the ultimate price for daring to resist. His execution was meant to end the story. Instead, it ensured that his name would endure, whispered in quarters and cane fields for generations. Charles Deslondes did not die quietly. His body may have been consumed, but his rebellion, his defiance, lingered like smoke carried by the Mississippi wind. For those who dreamed of freedom, he had proven that even the mightiest empire could be set ablaze by the will of the oppressed. The battle was over, but the cruelty had only begun. For the planters and their allies, victory was not enough. They demanded spectacle, vengeance, and the reimposition of fear. What followed was a reign of terror along the German coast, meant to smother any embers of rebellion that remained. Captured rebels were dragged before makeshift tribunals, their fate already sealed. There were no trials in any true sense, no defense, no mercy. The sentences were swift, death, and death in the most public form possible. More than 100 men were executed in the days that followed. Some were shot, others hanged, their bodies left to rot as warnings to all who passed. Most chilling of all were the severed heads. Dozens were mounted on pikes, placed along the levees of the Mississippi. Travelers who once saw neat rows of cane now faced a grotesque parade of skulls and flesh. The authorities wanted to turn the river road into a corridor of terror where the price of rebellion stared at everyone in silence. Families wept quietly in the fields, unable to mourn openly, for even grief was dangerous. Mothers and children recognized faces on those pikes, fathers, brothers, sons, but could not cry aloud. To do so was to risk being accused of sympathy, of rebellion, of treason against a system that demanded obedience. The German coast returned to its routines of labor and punishment, but nothing was the same. The silence that followed was not the silence of peace, but of trauma. The rebellion had been crushed, but the memory of its fire lingered, smoldering beneath the weight of fear. Planters believed they had restored order, yet in their desperate cruelty they revealed their own weakness. They had proven that their rule depended not on loyalty, but on violence, not on justice, but on terror. And for those forced back into the cane fields, one truth remained. If such a rebellion could rise once, it could rise again. Charles Deslondes and his comrades did not win. Their march ended in fire, blood, and mutilation. Yet in that brief uprising, they carved a mark into history that cannot be erased. The German Coast Rebellion of 1811 remains the largest enslaved uprising in the United States, a moment when hundreds declared with torches, machetes, and their very lives that freedom was worth any price. Their oppressors sought to silence them with cruelty, but silence does not erase memory. The fire they lit still flickers in the telling, in the remembering, in the question that lingers. Is a single blade raised in defiance stronger than the chains of an empire? Charles Deslondes lives on, not in the records of the masters, but in the spirit of all who dare to dream of liberty.